Okay, we should be live. Hello world, welcome to the first Most Wanted Music dial-in event from Berlin. I'm Joe Sparrow, and you might be able to see around me somewhere in some configuration our very special guests. So this is the first of a series of events for Most Wanted Music this year. As you can see, we have this, oh no, this side, the beautiful logo here. This is the first of a series of online events where we are taking some of the themes from the main conference, which is happening later this year, and we're bringing them into the sort of virtual space to help people socially distance and connect with what's going on in advance as well. So it's the first in a series of regular talks where some of the best speakers from Most Wanted Music and the pioneers who we have come and speak and take part and run workshops and communicate with people in the event are going to be sharing their vision and the strategies for the future of the music industry and the world beyond it. This first dial-in explores the question of how we can make a sustainable and socially acceptable transformation in the music business. It's a topic that is something that almost everybody inside and outside of the music industry wants to achieve, but sometimes feels distant or impenetrable, or people don't know where to start. So we're going to talk about how we can individually kickstart efforts to make the business greener, kinder, and more socially aware. And we have four experts to help us discuss that. Now, before I introduce them, or while I introduce them, my glamorous assistant off screen, Matthias, is going to launch a poll. So a poll, a little vote should appear on the screen in front of you with a question, just so we can take a little bit of a temperature test of what everyone is thinking. So we're talking about a few different topics on sustainability in the music business. And in your opinion, which ones are sort of most pressing for change? Where do you see the most need for change in the music industry and beyond? So is it in sustainability, transparency within the streaming business in terms of data and information and knowing where money comes from and all that kind of thing? Is it gender diversity? Is it needing to learn about creating virtual events and how to make them work better and more inclusively? Or is it maybe raising the artist's voice and giving the artist more of a chance to speak and communicate their needs to the world and the industry at large? So we'll leave that up there for a few minutes while people vote. And in that time, I will introduce the panel briefly and explain how we're going to do it. So who we have, who should I start with? I'll start in the order they are on my list here, which is, first of all, we have Bas Grasmayer, the founder of Music X Green, amongst other things. Bas, if you could give us a quick wave to say hello, hi there. We will come back to you shortly. We have Fina Stammnitz, director of the Greentouring network. Hi, Fina, good to meet you. We have Jessie Hong, founder of Truth Talk Berlin. Hi, Jessie. Hi, hi. And we have, last but by no means least, Katie Long, founder of The Artist Pledge. Hi, Katie. Now, we're going to talk to you in more detail in a few minutes. Here's how the session is going to work. We'll go around to each of these esteemed experts. I will quickly introduce them in a bit more detail, and they are going to give you a little bit of a 5-6 minute talk about their perspective and their work on sustainability. And then we will have a chance to ask questions to them as well. So we'll hear from them more in detail, and they won't stay silent for much longer. I will be silent. Now, if you're enjoying what's happening, you can use our hashtags on social media, should you wish to do that. That's the hashtag is MWM20. That's Most Wanted Music 20, and hashtag togetherness. So please, if you want to share this discussion and this event outside in the outside world online, you can do that. And just as a bit of information as well, we have these great speakers here, and you are out there, and we really want to hear your questions. So there is, in this webinar function, at the bottom of the screen, there should be a Q&A button. If you hit the Q&A button, you will be able to ask any question you'd like to the whole panel, or maybe you just want to ask it to one person in the panel. So feel free to do that. If you see a question that's already been asked that you like, you can upvote it, and we'll make sure that one definitely gets answered. There's also a chat room if you want to talk to your other attendees as well. Now, Most Wanted Music 2020, obviously this year is happening in a hybrid format. Thanks to coronavirus, a lot of changes are happening in the way that events are running. And this is going to be a hybrid online in real life event happening on November the 4th. And on November the 5th, here in Berlin, is the Satellite Day, which is the really exciting day where the city comes alive with lots of people running satellite events connected to the main themes the music industry, technology, change, sustainability, anything that is innovative and forward-looking in the music industry. So you are invited out there. If you're interested in hosting a satellite event, you can apply to do that on the website, and I'll give you more information at the end of this session. There will also be, at the end of the session, a link that will give you a heavily reduced concert ticket. So there's your incentive to hang around. Not that the people who are speaking won't be fascinating enough, but there will be you'll be able to get the current ticket with a €10 discount, which is a heavy discount. So let's look quickly at the polls, and then we'll start talking to the panel. So the runaway winner at the moment is sustainability. People are very interested in sustainability and how and the need for change in the music industry, but also beyond. Although I think we can see that it's split quite a lot across the board. Gender diversity, understandably, very, very important, and transparency in the streaming business for artists, virtual events, and magnifying the artist's voice also not inconsequential in terms of what people want to see more discussion of. And all those things will be happening at Most Wanted Music this year in Berlin, but also in these sessions we're going to be running. So with that in mind, let's move on to the first speaker, who, drum roll please, is Bas Grasmayer. Hi Bas. Bas is founder of Music, amongst other things, Music X Green, an online directory of organizations and initiatives that make the music industry more sustainable. In his newsletter, Music X Tech X Future, he highlights trends and innovation in technology and their impact on music and its business. He recently launched Music X Corona, a daily update. Good branding, consistency, by the way, here, Brad. This is a lesson for us all. A daily update on how the music business is handling the crisis and developments in a sort of more broader sense as well of how they're happening. Currently, he's working as a consultant on music, innovation, sustainability, and in previous years, he's worked in executive product roles for music streaming services, Adagio and Zvuj. Did I pronounce that correctly?
It's a Q, so it's a K.
Okay. I got vaguely in the area of it, right? Maybe.
Russian.
Bas is based in Berlin. So Bas, well, you're going to talk to us a little bit about. Well, why don't you tell us instead of me speaking for you? I've talked enough.
Did you forget? No. Thank you for the intro, Joe. Hello, everyone. I'll be talking about why local is the answer to a future of new normals. So another project, not mentioned, just before the pandemic hit, I started a new project called Hard Dance Berlin. And my intention was to map out the scenes of harder electronic music and try to bring them together more after I noticed that people from different scenes that liked each other's music, but they rarely came together. And I wanted to shine a light on all the local events happening that caters to those people that love those sounds. And in many weeks found like 4 events on the nights, or like events on 4 of the nights. 1 week in February even had 7 relevant events. So like on all 7 nights, that's Berlin. But then it stopped abruptly. First, the cancellations came from concerned organizers, and then the lockdown happened and forced organizers who hadn't really caught up yet to also cancel their events. And my vision had been this: focusing on local allows people from various scenes to collaborate and create new scenes. We'd be able to support each other, and no more having to EasyJet around Europe every weekend just to pay the bills as a DJ. But in the middle of March, there was no local to focus on. Everyone's local was reduced to staying at home. And while everyone's at home, focusing on local seems kind of pointless, because what would once emerge as a local subculture from a record shop and a venue in a city now emerges through networks of artists on SoundCloud and Instagram. Like organizers and artists, and maybe some of you are in the virtual room, scramble to get like live streams up and running, while the amount of daily new information added an edge of overload to a time of uncertainty. But something has happened since the initial lockdowns. I think we went from something that was very hard to grasp and felt completely overwhelming, maybe back to a certain calm, at least. We know most countries have similar style lockdowns in place. And while uncertainty and hardship is still part of daily reality for many of us, and will be for foreseeable future, things have also become a lot more predictable than back in March and April. But unfortunately, I think that's temporary. We're now seeing governments inside the EU give negative travel advice to their citizens traveling to those countries or regions in Europe. Like the most obvious one is the UK and Germany giving negative travel advice for Spain recently. Also in the past week, the Dutch government advised their citizens to avoid the Antwerp area after an outbreak, after which the Belgian government today gave out a similar warning for all of the Netherlands. So while we're carefully trying to get live music back on its feet with proper safety measures in place, we're seeing a landscape evolve that is as complicated as it was in early March when some cities and regions were locked down, but countries were still open. But would they be by the time you actually had to be there? So in order to maintain or increase certainty and predictability, we're seeing organizers of drive-in shows and the rare socially distanced events and even many live streams depend on local cultures, venues, crews, artists. Now let's imagine a few months forward. We'll likely see a complicated landscape of lockdowns as countries and states and cities deal with outbreaks. Whenever all's clear, events with proper hygiene may be permitted, but when things get more complicated, an area might go into a form of lockdown at maybe almost no notice. So let's imagine next summer. Let's say we have a vaccine by then, which is optimistic but not unrealistic. Will that vaccine give long-term immunity or be more like a flu shot? Can we get it out to large enough parts of our population? How quickly? What about other places in the world? And then what does the world look like? Because we'll know that this can happen again, as it nearly did with like bird flu and swine flu, etc. You name it. Mm. And what about the other crises? Like every year we see record temperatures and more extreme weather events. Governments are discussing Green New Deals to reorganize their economies in order to address the crises of climate, waste, and biodiversity. So the new normal is not a static thing. It's a future of new normals. And that current local focus that we're seeing is here to stay. It's risk mitigation. That's not to say your favorite bands won't be coming to town anymore. They probably will, but since focusing on local scenes is one of the most effective strategies for mitigating risk in the face of these crises, I think we'll see a renaissance of local scenes in an interconnected world where scenes from Berlin, New Orleans, Shanghai, etc. can be made visible to each other and get inspiration from each other. So by what we're learning now about building online business models, we can make sure that music won't depend as much on cheap air travel as it used to, because it's not great for the environment, and eventually there probably won't be air travel as cheap as it has been. So I'd like to, I'm wrapping up, I'd like to encourage everyone to think long-term and build global networks for local impacts. Our future kind of depends on it.
Thanks, Baz. I mean, this is a very interesting, a round of applause for Baz taking place. This is great, very good. Thanks, Baz. Now, this is actually quite an interesting approach you're taking, because it's actually pulling together a few of, I mentioned all the various projects you've launched at the start, but it sort of pulls those together in a different way, doesn't it? This idea of localization and online community dealing with a few issues, isn't it? It deals with green issues, it deals with travel, it deals with suddenly focusing on local. Do you think this idea of bringing, we've had communities online for a long time, but what you're doing is a bit different. It's about pulling people together in a local sense for the benefit of the wider world. That's almost the opposite of what we've been doing recently online, isn't it? Where we look out to the world and try and get it to us.
Yeah, so 2 points maybe to address. In terms of it coming together with a lot of other things I'm doing, it's just like a combination of my interests. I don't think it's necessarily the one very best way to address, for instance, sustainability in music. I think there's a lot of ways. The other speakers will dive into them. We need a combination of efforts. And two, I think one cool example, there's all these local scenes and they don't see each other, but now they do. Like only the DJs or performers, they would go to, I don't know, Paris and New York, Berlin, see the local scenes there around maybe even the same music. And now that's, like since lockdown, we see these local scenes mixing online in virtual environments and virtual concerts and stuff like that. So suddenly it's not just the performers exposed to these different scenes, or maybe the people in labels and stuff like that, but it's also the participants in those scenes. So I think that's really cool. Yeah, I don't know. I think those scenes have always been there, but I think we can emphasize them more again to make music feel real next to the online thing, which sometimes feels a bit disconnected.
Yeah, it's certainly a key part of the puzzle that we're starting to solve after, especially when you can't go to clubs and gigs and things like that. Well, we'll come back to talk to you a bit later, Baz, after we've heard everybody else, and perhaps that will start to tie in with what everyone else is saying. So thanks very much. Well, moving on to Fina next. Hi, Fina. Fina Stammnitz is working as an independent artist manager and sustainability consultant. Since last year, she's been focusing on finding out how the music industry contribute to climate protection. To continue working on this topic, she founded the Greentouring network in order to develop new sustainable ideas and concepts in the future. Now this is obviously an extremely important topic right now, but it's also been impacted in various different ways with the current crisis. So what are you going to show us and talk to us about now, Fina?
Hi guys, I have written a little story about the future that I would like to read to you guys. So yeah, I'm gonna share some slides to make it a little bit more visible. Let me know if it works. You see it?
Super, yeah, perfect.
All right. Let me just see. You see the presentation?
Yes,
awesome.
Yes.
Okay. So, the climate crisis is the biggest threat for humanity and life as we know it at the moment. We have to actively work on becoming more ecologically sustainable in order to preserve a life worth living for us, our children and grandchildren. Climate change is happening. The question is how we as the population of the Earth will cope with it. Will climate change unite the world or divide it? Will we be on the way to solving climate change, or will the challenges be too much for us? And what can the music industry contribute to the solutions? How will the music industry work in the future? These questions are impossible to answer definitively. But I'd like to tell you a story, the vision that we from Greentouring Network work for and want for the future music industry. The year is 2030. The climate has evolved. Some areas have become impossible to live in because of extreme heat and water shortage. The average temperature has risen by 1.3 degrees, which has caused a lot of disruptions, but still we managed to reach the 1.5 degrees goal, thanks to an adjustment of the climate protection law. We have to cope with regular lockdowns and adaptations in our daily lives as consequences of climate change and global warming. People had to move to different places, old cities had to be adapted, and new communities have been built up. During the last decades, tipping points in the climate or in the social and economic context caught us off guard. In 2020 alone, there have been huge wildfires across Australia and a global pandemic that forced the whole society to endure a lockdown and adapt to this new situation. These were the first real symptoms of climate change that the civilization in the West experienced. Around that time, people started to organize themselves and started movements like Fridays for Future or Extinction Rebellion. They brought up climate change as the most urgent crisis, which has to be handled, a debate that should have been started far earlier, when scientists started measuring and displaying the crisis we were heading to. Because of those movements, all these changes and major consequences of climate change did not get us down as a society. Once everyone realized that the climate change is that the climate crisis was a real thing and that we had to make major changes immediately, there were huge shifts taking place in the society. Development funds for eco-efficient technology and innovation were introduced, cities and countries focused on making the habitable space more sustainable, and people started organizing themselves in communities helping out one another. We managed to become almost emission neutral in 2030 thanks to greenhouse gas taxation, new technologies, strict standards and laws throughout all the industries, as well as the commitment of the people themselves in actively participating in climate protection. In 2030, green and emission neutral touring and artist activities is not an idealistic idea anymore, but a standard amongst all touring artists. The whole music industry started working together on changing old behavioral patterns and implementing new, better solutions across all branches of the industry. But how did we get there? In 2020, a global initiative called Music Declares Emergency rose up and started an international network of artists and music business workers. They initiated campaigns and petitions that made the music industry go greener and use its potential as a role model branch. They motivated and convinced artists to actively participate in climate protection. Artists spread the slogan, "No music on a dead planet," and started educating their fans about climate protection. That led to a change of thinking and behavior throughout the whole society. As a consequence, the climate protection law got replaced with a new one that is effective and strict enough to help protect our climate. Music Declares Emergency now is a network with branches in every national music industry, bringing them together globally while still acknowledging the national specification. The Greentouring network developed to a music business-wide coalition between the artists and the music business professionals in exchange with scientists. New technologies are being checked to see if they could lead to improvement in the music industry. Campaigns are run together with Music Declares Emergency, and we were able to establish a code of conduct throughout the whole music industry. Together with a coalition of businesses operating in music, we assigned SEE Institute to conduct research on the real CO2 emissions of the music industry. That's how realistic data was collected, and for the first time, there was a value to refer to when it comes to reducing the carbon footprint of the industry. Additionally, with those results, a task force of scientists, developers, and music business participants was able to develop a tool for tracking the carbon footprint of every part of the industry. Now, each year, in addition to the economic report of the industry, there also is an ecological one, reflecting about how successful we were able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and how far on the way to our goal, emission neutrality, we are right now. The factor ecological sustainability is no longer a trendy attribute, but a condition in order to continue working as a part of the music industry. So that's our vision of 2030 and how we would like it to look like. But whatever 2030 will really look like, over the next decade, the landscape of the music business will have altered drastically. We are faced with a choice to collectively act now and work together on making climate protection a priority, or having to react to an uncontrollably changing environment. The actions we take now will determine the future of the music industry. Thanks.
Thanks, Fina, and another round of applause, well deserved as well. Although everyone's microphones are on silent, so you can imagine the sound. So Fina, I mean, you're involved with the Music Declares Emergency initiative, and you're also working with, you founded the Greentouring network. This is probably a big question because those two things are connected, but obviously touring, people might imagine, obviously touring has a large carbon footprint, but the whole music industry has an enormous carbon footprint. You know, streaming servers take a lot of energy. That's obviously a sort of a step-by-step progressive change. And you painted a great picture of in 10 years' time when that change has happened, and it felt good. So, and we all probably feel that. So what sort of changes, and this is a very complicated question, but but we all have to start somewhere. So what are the sort of starting steps that anybody, whether they're an artist, they're touring, they're uploading music to the internet, they're a fan of music, what sort of things can they do to make a change within the realm of music?
I think before there's like realistic data and numbers that we can, like, as I stated in my story, that we can compare to see how much better we got. I think the best thing is to just rethink every work you do and to think about how you can make it better. I mean, at this stage, we don't have like a clear frame, or we don't have clear numbers to see the results. But I think you can try to think new, to get together with others, to see if you can share as much as you like. I mean, for artists, it's pretty clear what you can do. You can like talk to your community, talk to your fans, try to get some new ideas in their heads, or try to inspire them, and yeah, just try to rethink everything you're doing in the classical way by how you could do it more environmentally friendly.
As you said, we'll move on to the others in a second. But as you said, in your little presentation there, the artists have a particularly important role to play, and we've seen this in other areas and in sustainability. Does it really need a lot more of the very big artists to make very open public statements repeatedly? You know, if Taylor Swift started pushing very, very hard for these kind of changes you're talking about, she has this very, very this fan base that will follow her. Is that something that they really should be doing a bit more of and being proactive?
I think so. I mean, I would never tell artists what to do or what to do with their platform, but I think in those times where it's like really, it's a pressing topic, it's not some crisis, it's basically a life or death crisis. So I think it could help a lot. Now, big artists started already. I mean, Billie Eilish wore the "No Music on a Dead Planet" slogan at the AMAs. The Folds had the banner on the red carpet, and stuff like this happened. But still, it's not enough. I think everyone should get involved and try to influence the people they can reach.
Well, talking of influencing artists, we've got a question in the Q&A here, which applies directly to this. It's from an anonymous question asker. They said, what role do artist managers play within the environmental change? What can they do? You know, an artist works very closely with, they're not telling artists what to do, but the manager works very closely with them. And in lots of the decisions you've talked about, creating merchandise, making decisions about traveling, about things that have an environmental impact. What are good things that they can do when they're working with the artist and engaging outwards as well?
I think artist managers can play a big role if they're like informed on the topic and if they get themselves the knowledge they need, because they can talk to the booking agencies on how to make the tour greener, to say that it's like a #1 priority and that other decisions depend from the sustainability of the tour. They can educate the artists, they can talk to every business partner and try to spread the message in this way throughout the music industry. And if one artist has a manager who's like really caring for this topic and who's making those decisions, it could influence other artists who are then keen on having sustainability advising too. And this could be a real game changer, I think.
Yeah, Baz, maybe we can put a similar question to you, which is when we talk about community building, you know, managers or artist teams, whether it's an artist in a traditional sense or a DJ or community of DJs, you know, they're working together to a common cause. But what kind of things can they do to initiate environmental change? I see you've actually shared a link in the Q&A section as well if people are interested in looking.
Yeah, so like the Music Declares Emergency that Fina mentioned, they have like a really great resource towards the bottom of the page where like they have every role in music. So it's like, it's kind of a default answer. It says, if your role is that, these are the things you can do. You know, to give it a local aspect, I think a lot of people buy instruments they almost never use. You know, cool to create initiatives to share access to things. Obviously, it saves money, so that's good. And that's the reason why a lot of people are already doing these things. But I think we can be more, or like groups of people can be more effectively organized to like share access to equipment and spaces and things like that.
And it really is, it comes down to that idea of thinking local to have an impact in a global sense.
Yeah, actually, for me, getting into the topic of sustainability, years ago, I was really surprised how such a global problem, the answers to it are to a large extent locally, or in terms of anyone can do something locally, and the really, really difficult things, they have to be solved on a global level. But that also means that trickles back down to actual small local actions.
Well, we'll continue this conversation after, because I think there's a lot to discuss here after we've heard from the next two speakers. So thank you, Fina and Bas, for your opening bits, as it were. So Katie Long. Katie, you're the founder of the Artist Pledge, a community of music, industry insiders, building a progressive, generous, and transparent future. You're a collaboration specialist with an interest in cultivating atmospheres of collective empowerment, and have dedicated your career to creating bonds, unlikely bonds, and amplifying individual voices. And you were born, as a little bit of a bonus information, you were born in Texas, but now live in Berlin. So welcome, Katie. Thank you for, that's a very full life story I think I've given of you there. So
thank you.
Yeah, no, anytime. I'm available for weddings and bar mitzvahs as well.
Perfect.
So we've heard from Bas and Fina about those perspectives. What are you going to, how are you going to address this? What's your perspective?
Oh, I mean, I think it's really building off what they said. I think it was a really great setup because, so the focus of the Artist Pledge, like you said, it's a network of industry insiders, you know, who have a shared value system of progress, transparency, generosity, but they're making a pledge, an individual pledge, to use their position to uphold these values. And so, I think I'm frozen. I don't know. I'm back. Okay. And so we see music as being, okay, good, cool. So we see music as being like fundamental to like the core of humanity. And you really need to look both inside the industry and outside the industry to say like what needs to be changed systemically to address the needs of artists, musicians, and then how can artists and musicians then take this position to help the bigger world. So I think these, you know, the scene is a great example, like these green initiatives are a great example. And we want to do this by having these people with insider status, amplifying and bringing visibility to the grassroots campaigns, to the scene work, to these things that are happening at a community level. So it's kind of pulling it all together and then making it quite visible. So the pledgees are made up of people from all over the industry. So you're looking at musicians, record label executives, lawyers, producers, and this is important because everyone has a role to play, and it's only by taking like a holistic approach that you're able to untangle these really complicated issues. So it's kind of like when people are allowed to bring their stories and their voices and their experience and knowledge into a situation, it actually makes it stronger and makes diversity. So it's a little bit about like how we're taking this on and really pushing for real change on a systemic level. And then I guess it's focusing on 3 different areas that we see need to happen at once for change to happen, being like at the human level, looking at mental health at a societal level, so how artists use their position to push for social change, and then also at a professional level, which is how we create that change within the industry. And so like a little bit more about me. My background is in design and business operations. And so the lens I'm bringing is putting humans and people at the center of what we do, but also acknowledging that like the proper structures need to be in place to support them. And that kind of guides the work that we're looking at. And
what
so
are the challenges you face when you're talking about entrenched structures in the music industry and using the power of communities and connectivity to change that or to make a better one? What are the challenges you face?
So, I mean, I think like one of the challenges is artists are like the key function of the music industry, but they aren't acknowledged as such. You've got $43 billion in revenue and only 12% goes to the artists themselves, the one who are making the content, making the key element. And that's historically for the past 20 years, it's like 7 to 12%. And so it's really about creating access and an avenue for value for these people, you know, outside of monetary, but, you know, having them own their masters, like have access to the royalties for the work that they create, and also allowing them the space to take their art, like they're creators, they're artists, and take their art for the betterment of like the society and the world.
And can that happen? That can happen on a platform level. So are we?
Yeah,
yeah, we've
I mean,
seen
it can happen. It happens. It's happening.
Yeah, we've seen in the past, say, 10
levels.
years the development of huge platforms, incredibly powerful platforms, streaming services of various types, being the sort of main public-facing face of, if you like, of the music industry. Whether we're talking Spotify, YouTube, Deezer, anybody, you know, these are the way people connect with music. But they are sort of monolithic, and they're large, and they are working in a particular function for the industry. What are the sort of the newer, more recent platforms that perhaps could help enable the things you were talking about?
So I've got a few interesting ones I'm excited to share with you. Great. Thank you for the setup. So some of the ones that we have are based out of the US. There's AmpLed, but anyone can join. And it's kind of a mix between Patreon and Bandcamp, where artists can upload their work and then can access it directly. And why this one is special is because it's a co-op. So the artists, the fans and the people working there all actually own the company and share in the profits. I think on, a social level, you've got organizations like the Music Workers Alliance and BBZ out of London that are, coming together from a multidisciplinary musician stance and then doing change within a community setting. And within the human space, I would go with like Silence the Shame, which is started by Shanti Das and is about destigmatizing mental health issues within the music industry.
Right. And when you talk about these communities, if you like, they are communities as well as platforms and
Yeah.
they have a structured approach to change. And you're essentially working from the bottom up, but you also need something to come from the top down, right? The change needs to happen in both directions, ideally, I guess, for it to take place. So how can you initiate that? If you're near the top of the pyramid, you can make big changes quickly. What kind of changes in the music industry, let's say, would you like to see people at the top of the music industry like to initiate to help the growth and the change from the bottom?
I mean, I think that's where like this comes in, is the people at the top should actually be raising those voices. Like they don't need to do something different. They actually just need to bring visibility to what's already happening and let people who are organizers organize and then use their platform to push for the change that the people in the industry are saying that they need and want. Yeah,
I mean, we recently saw, for instance, the music industry had a lot of discussion and sort of self-searching in the wake of the Black Lives Matter movement. Overdue discussion of representation of people in the music industry, throughout the music industry. Do you think that perhaps in the music industry now, in the wake of that, it's a bit, I'm not saying the music industry is incredibly narcissistic and self-serving, but do you think that in the light of what's happened recently, there is a sort of, although it came from Black Lives Matter, which in itself was rooted in a sort of a bad situation, do you think there is an appetite for change of that type?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that that's one part of it, but I think it's really wide-reaching, and it goes. I think to. I think one of the commenters was like, why aren't we talking about diversity, as an entire thing? Like you have so many elements, and that's why we didn't want to limit people to one issue, because people are passionate about so many things. And so let people be passionate about what they're passionate about, and then have it all come together to make that change possible. Like everything comes up at the same time. Yeah.
Yeah, great. Well, we've got a few more questions coming in, which we'll address in a few minutes. There's someone, Katie, has asked if you could share the links to the platforms you mentioned. So perhaps we'll sort that out a little bit as well in the chat, perhaps. But we'll come back to you because we have a lot more to discuss. Thank you very much. So maybe a round of applause for Katie for discussing that. It's nice if everyone gets one, I guess. And then last but by no means least, Jessie Hong, thank you for joining us. Jessie's a musician with a business, sustainability management and performing arts background. She's founder of Truth Talk Berlin, a non-profit thematic keynote series of talks that has collaborated with partners such as I'm going to pronounce this incorrectly, but the Schwägen Group and Microsoft Berlin. In her achievements over the years, she's won several business games with L'Oréal Italy, Commerzbank, and Vodafone UK, and she aims to use her multidisciplinary talents to bring like-minded individuals together, to nurture confidence in communities, and inspire the people who are in them. Thanks for joining us, Jessie. Now, you're going to, explain to us what you're going to talk about, because your background is not while you are have a performing arts background and a musician, you're looking a bit more globally. So what is it you want to talk about with us today?
So not actually globally, but I would like to talk about sustainability, right? In the music industry, in music business. So when someone from this business, from this circle, they brought this topic onto the table, they talked about sustainability, be it from a classical musician, from a concert manager, or a music producer, what people usually think about, how do we make the industry greener? How do we make a greater impact in this industry? Like what Baz and Fina have been talking about, how could we make the insight better? It's not until I dive kind of deep into this topic that I realize I personally, at least, have been seeing this topic in a rather passive perspective, in a rather passive role. And so I'm not here today to tell you what a music change maker I am. I'm here actually today to bring you the case studies that actually inspired me to have the discussion with everyone today and potentially to make you the next music change maker. And naming one of the most important industries that operate all over the world today, just very different from our topics today, agriculture, where there are also like a lot of debates going on with uses of pesticides and antibiotics, also a lot of environmental topics that people talked about and discussed. And so in France, the method of exposing plants, for example, to music has actually been adopted by hundreds of farmers, and especially, like with fruits and vegetables, vine, for example, that are easily contaminated by viruses. And there's a French company called Genetics. They're doing this, so they expose plants to music for 5 to 7 minutes a day, every evening, and powered by solar panels. And so this has, it has not managed to eradicate viruses, for example. But just like how the topic of people talked about how classical music has had an effect, has an impact on human brains in babies, it has the sound waves, the musical sound waves are proven actually to have the same uplifting effects on plants as it does on people. And so this is now all about experimenting music in different industry. So what kind of genre, at what frequency, what instrument, at what timing. And on the other side of the world, so listening to Mozart has somehow become a new routine in a poultry farm based in Malaysia and Singapore. So they actually play classical music to chickens several times during the day, because chickens are active during the day and then they sleep in the evening. And traditionally, chicken farms, they are notorious for producing like noxious fumes, loud noises from the surroundings. It's not an environment that you walked into and you'll be like, oh, this is healthy, this is good for the mental health, this is so calm. And then you walked into this chicken farm where chickens are exposed to classical music several minutes a day on a daily basis, and they're significantly calmer when human approaches, for example. So I don't know how exposed people nowadays are to poultry, for example, but normally what happens is when you get close to them, they run away, right? And it's not about how calm the music has made the chicken, but it's all the advantage that comes within that counts, like stable growth, stable appetite, stable health, and sorry for the vegans and vegetarians out there, you get juicier, better meat to eat, for example. And then it's all about the experiment, the trial and error again. And they have tried different music over a period of time. And for how multicultural Malaysia is, they play all sorts of music. It's not just like pop, classical. They try to implement Aboriginal music, Indian music, even Buddhist scripture, and to the chickens, and just kind of observe to what extent and also to which genre the chickens have the most positive reactions, which in the end, it doesn't just benefit the farm, the chickens, but also the people working in that environment. So with the majority actually coming from Bangladesh. So now if you think about it, people don't work in an environment that you think it is. They don't just work in a poultry farm. They work in a musical farming environment. And the concept of using music itself as a tool, as a driver to leverage sustainable process of production may seem, you know, somewhat utopian. So what I'm trying to make it clear now is not that how great of an impact music could make, like on plants, on chickens, on poultry, on human brains, but just the effect of music alone. And there are much more, you know, more than one factor, like what make up to a good sustainable industry. And I just hope that my little dive into this topic today, putting music as an active role, not about changing music industry itself, but, you know, I hope that could arouse some other perspectives in the music industry to offer an incentive to how you can make an impact, not by changing the industry itself, although it's also important, because it has, you know, a great influence all around the world when it comes to climate change and so on. But to pioneer change using our own industry and the idea of placing music in an active role, and it isn't just applicable in agriculture, for example, but countless other industries for, you know, in well-being, in education, in maximizing diversity in communities by simply supporting like diverse music, aboriginal music, putting them in different industries, and even for lives below water and on land. And yeah, I guess this is just, I just want to offer a different perspective when it comes to sustainability in our industry, in the music industry, and how you could make a change, not by changing it, but by combining it, bridging it with other industry. That will be my talk today.
Yeah, thank you, Jessie. And a round of applause, of course, for Jessie as well. Thank you very much. Yes, there we are. So Jessie, I mean, this is an interesting idea, really, which is instead of focusing on purely changing the industry, taking what already exists, the music, and applying it in different ways, in perhaps novel ways, to, well, almost anything to try and seek ways of improving it. For someone who perhaps, well, let's look from the perspective then of someone who is not in the music industry. How would they seek to incorporate music? You mentioned a few ways there, you know, in a few varied ways of using it. But what are other incentives for them to incorporate music? I mean, you know, people in the business world will say, well, you know, if it makes me more money by making whatever industries I'm running work better, I'll do it. So how can they start doing that in a sort of practical way to bridge that gap?
It always starts from like working with someone locally. So I guess music is exposed to everyone. Everyone is exposed to music. And if you are not from the industry yourself, like you're not from the music industry, you can always work with someone else. It's never about doing this job alone, but more like how you cooperate with each other and incorporate this to different industries. I guess seeking help is one of the better options out there. You never have to do it alone, especially when it comes to business, because there are ways to monetize things. Of course, when you talked about when someone doing business, they want to make something profitable and support the local music artists, This is also one way of driving change and sustainability in music. It's not just, of course, about reducing plastic use and stuff like that. Yeah, it's just
so by connecting with local, maybe musicians or local groups of musicians or local communities, you could actually unearth a brand new way of connecting music with something completely new, which will have an unintended positive effect.
And of course, it comes down to what do you want it for? So let's say you own an enterprise, you have a corporate today. What do you want music to be for? Is it for your employees? Is it for this or that? So I guess there are different ways and different approaches on how people could do it. But if someone is not from the industry itself, look for the professionals and then get some advice and, you know, get some suggestion how we as artists would like to implement, how we would like to make a change in your industry. So apart from you telling us what to do, we tell you what to do. And then we find a solution that benefits both parties.
Great, thanks. Well, we've heard from all of you now, so thank you very much. Now we've got a few questions from the audience. We'll probably have time to answer maybe one or two of them. I've got one that I think we can actually aim at everybody. So here's an interesting starting point. We've heard about from all of you looking at it from different perspectives, but all of you have had a sort of common theme, which is about working together, working locally where appropriate, and looking to induce change in a bigger structural sense. That's sort of been a theme throughout this. So someone anonymous has asked, from the perspective of someone working within the music industry, what other parts of society can we support? So how can, perhaps you will all have a different perspective on this, but where would you start because it's a big world out there, and it's a bit like opening Spotify, and you've got all the music in the world in front of you, and which one do you click play on first? So if it was up to you individually as people, maybe Fina, we'll start with you, because you're first on my screen as I see you. Where would you look to use your position and platform and power, if you like, in the music industry to help which parts of society?
I think it's pretty complicated to like make out one part, because in the end it's all correlated. Just in the movements of the Black Lives Matter protests, it became really clear. It was a thing that was new to me too, how correlated climate justice and systemic racism are. So if there's systemic racism, there can never be climate justice in a world, for instance. So I think that everything is so correlated that it's really hard to address like one topic or one part of society. And I mean, sustainability is more than what I was just talking about. It's not just ecological, it's also social and economical. And so I think it all starts with the individuals. I mean, this sort of change can only happen if by mouth propaganda. It can start if the daughter of a man says, okay, this is an issue for me, I have to start this. She inspires them, everyone goes talking. And I think it's hard to make out one part of the society. I think it's the part where you can address the individuals to make a brighter change in the end. If that was understandable.
No, thanks, Fina. Yeah, no, I understand. It's a complicated question. I mean, Baz, you were speaking earlier about creating communities of like-minded people. That's a good, like you were saying, Fina, that's a good way to have face-to-face conversations, initiate a consensus and change. So perhaps instead of saying a slight variation on that question, instead of saying what would be your starting point, how would a group of people pick their starting point? Because as Fina said, it's a huge world of interconnected issues, and we are all motivated to change. So how do you pick a place to start?
Is this direct? Oh my God.
You guys, yes.
Cool. Good question. Hard. I mean, start from where you are. So what I find really interesting is, or like what I find a great example, and I might be misinterpreting the question from the Q&A, what I find a great example of music using its cultural influence to make the world better. I think events are really easy to use as an example there. For instance, I think for a lot of people, the first time they tried vegetarian food was at a festival that didn't have any other options. Like the people, you know, the really late people who just want meat in everything all the time. And like, it's better for the climate and maybe public health if we eat a little bit less meat, or probably a lot less meat. So that's one. Then the other is, and this is something, so in the Netherlands, there's a big organization called IDNT, and they started with organizing big electronic music festivals, very hedonistic, crazy 90s stuff, and now just mega productions. And the founders, or some of the founders of that, they started something called Open House, Open-House. And they work with NGOs such as Red Cross to use festivals as a staging ground or a testing ground for solutions that they also use for refugee shelters, like the temporary camps. Because all these festivals, they're temporary cities. So if you need to suddenly have like sanitary infrastructure in place, or your, I don't know, first aid, you know, quick response and things like that, energy grids, maybe even green energy grids. How do you do that for like these massive camps? So you can test this on events that happen, thankfully, way more often, like music festivals, than refugee crises. So I think that's another way that from music you can do that. So that's more from the event space.
So that's sort of thinking laterally and looking for connections with maybe connecting problems with existing sort of similar things and trying to bring the things together in terms of testing out solutions in a sort of safer environment, I guess. Yeah, that's a good idea. Okay, yeah, thanks, Baz. Katie, we were talking earlier about agitating for change, if you like, and using platforms. Structurally, then, again, we're talking about togetherness and initiating change. How else can people, with those platforms perhaps, or with those groups, or with that structural change, how can they pick a starting point? Because when I talk to people about sustainability, they always say they want to do it, but where do I start?
It's overwhelming. Yeah, it's overwhelming. I mean, I think you start with what you're passionate about, right? And so you pick one thing that you care about, and then you can kind of create a model for yourself, like structure for yourself about how to approach it. So it's like, start with your community first, like the people that you care about, the people that you interact with on a daily basis, then take it out to the scene. Like the scene is a great place to start for anyone wanting to get involved, your local community. And then within that local community, how does that go national? How does that go international? And so really just starting small, but picking something that you care deeply about so that you're motivated to stick with it. And then you can kind of build off what you're doing and find like small actionable steps that you can take to build into an international platform, like finding other organizations and other places that might be doing similar things and connecting them together. And so it's like not all at once, one step at a time, you know, just sticking with it, slow and steady.
I guess that's a hard message to communicate in a world where we are bombarded with messages on a sort of global scale. We
slow down. Everyone should slow down. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's you know, and I guess you can incentivize. I mean, I guess you can incentivize people to come together locally, connect with what Baz was just saying, with music, right? You can bring people together very easily with music, and then you can start to agitate for change like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure.
Cool. Thanks. And Jessie, again, I'm afraid last but by no means least, when you're looking, you were talking about connecting music with interesting other parts of the world to push through positive change. If you're working in the music industry, so if let's say we're on this side of things, maybe we have an audience of people who make music or work with musicians, how is a good way for them to decide where to experiment with and connect with to use their music in a progressive way like that?
That is not an easy question because everyone, you know, they have different interests. I think sometimes you connect things with that you have a personal connection with. Say, you know, if the owner of the poultry farm or the owner of the vineyards, they don't have a personal connection with classical music or music in general, they wouldn't have approached it in the first place. They wouldn't have thought about that idea in the first place. So I guess it's then it goes back to what is your personal connection to what you want to work on. So is there an industry that you want to change, that you want to help make a better place out there for the people, or that you think you could make an impact using your music, using what you already have in your hand on the table? So yeah, I think it really depends.
And what is I mean, for people who are sort of watching and maybe thinking, right, how do I, are there any sort of simple tools that people can use to sort of initiate? We all get stuck, whether in a creative way, we all get stuck in a path. And often those interesting changes and the interesting collaborations come by breaking away from that path. But that's often very difficult to do. What sort of tools or ideas, do you know any sort of thing, anything like that people can use to sort of hit the reset switch and find a new path through?
I don't have a good recommendation for now, but I guess sometimes you can learn from looking at the role models. So doing some research online, what's working, what people are working on, what's the trends, what people out there, what other artists, what other musicians are trying to make a change, from the outside in a very holistic approach. You can always find a trace from it. What you find, do you find a connection with it? Do you think you can also do the same? Do you think you can also do something similar? Do you like the idea of it? Finding a role model is always a good way of finding how you could make a change. if you don't know how to start.
Sort of connects to what Katie, well, I think everybody has been saying actually, which is you have to be true to yourself and you have to find out what you really enjoy doing and how you think you can initiate the change that you want and be true to that, I guess, isn't it? Yeah. Well, we are sort of running out of time, so I'm going to let everyone go. But thank you very much for joining us. Let's go around quickly and say thank you very much, Fine, Baz, Katie, and Jessie. We're very grateful for you joining us here at the first dial-in session. Now, we've got a couple of quick announcements, including the reduced conference ticket thing, which is of interest to people. Now, the main conference date for Most Wanted Music this year is the 4th of November. Most Wanted Music will be happening in a hybrid format. Speakers confirmed so far for November within the music Changemakers track, which is the sort of the area we've been talking to and the experts we've been talking to today, as well as the people you've just seen, includes Madame Gandhi, who is a performance artist, agitator for change, and has done plenty of high-profile work highlighting a number of different important issues in the music industry and outside of it. Also, Changemakers, the artist, and who also is doing similar things. Micha Fritz from Viva Con Agua, and BT Wolf, the British artist who is multidisciplinary and is not only making music, but looking to push what music is and the effect that music can have in the world. So we've got a bunch of great speakers, including the ones you've just seen. So you may be asking at this point, how can you see them? I will tell you shortly. But that's on November the 4th. On November the 5th, and that will be happening, by the way, on a hybrid online-offline platform. November the 5th is the Satellite Day, where events happen all over Berlin. We will be sharing links in a second in the chat. So if you're interested in any of these things, the conference itself, the satellites, and the ticket reduction code, open the chat now and you will see this being shared. Now, the satellite events happen all over Berlin. They're hyper-focused, really interesting and great for finding people who are in your niche and are motivated to do the kind of change that you want to, exactly what we've just spoken about. So that's happening on November the 5th. If you would like to host your own satellite event, if you're a business or you are some sort of collective or a group of people, you can apply for that on our website, and the link is directly in the chat there. It's mwm-berlin.de/satellites. But all the links are clickable rather than writing down my mangled German. Now, so how do you get to the conference, whether it's online or or however you want to attend? Well, there is a link for the reduced conference ticket is also in the chat. There is a 10% discount available with that link right now. So you can get the current ticket for 20 euros instead of 30 euros. That's a huge and really good discount, and it will give you access to the event, including all of the speakers we've seen today, the ones I mentioned, and a whole load more who are going to be announced very shortly. Thanks for joining us. Now, we will hope to see you at the next dial-in session, which is on the topic of music communities, which is sort of building on what we've spoken about today. So how can music work in a community sense, and how can music be used to build communities and empower communities around the world. So that's the next dial-in session. That's happening on September the 3rd. So make sure you dial in again on September the 3rd. Now, after this call finishes, we're going to leave the channel open for a while, even though I will disappear. And if those of you who are in attendance would like to discuss some of the topics we've talked about, including the links to the platforms that Katie mentioned, which are being shared in chat and in the Q&A section right now. We're going to leave open, there's a link that's been posted to yotribe.com. It's a special networking space. It's free, you click, it's easy, you create a little avatar, and you can find other people in that space who want to talk about the same things. You sort of click your way over to them and start a conversation. So we'll leave the chat open for a few minutes after this session, and you can explore the links that are in the chat, and you can go over to the YoTribe space and discuss it with other people, particularly perhaps the links that are being shared, which people were asking for from Katie's platforms, including about building communities in the music world. Okay, that's it from me. I've been Joe Sparrow here in Berlin from the Most Wanted Music Room of Doors. Where do they go? I'm going to go and find out. But thanks for joining us. I hope to see you again soon, and I hope that's been useful. Please leave us some feedback, Please do explore the links that are being shared in chat and go and discuss them in Yo Tribe. That's it for now. But as I said, the next one is on the 3rd of September, and we'll be discussing music communities. Thank you very much and good evening.